Hi, welcome to the sixth and last lecture of History of Architecture and Structural Design, Form and Space. I'm going to show you today some biographies of architects and engineers, artists and other people who felt responsible for the built environment and about buildings, architecture, and all what we talked about in the last lectures. Yes, I hope you'll have an informative lecture today as well, and I'd like to thank you for all your patience during all the lectures and during all the sessions we had. The Q&As. We're going to have another Q&A after this lecture, but this will be the last one of these dates in this kind of form. Yes, I wish you success and hope you find a good way in your studies you're going to make from this. I'd like to say goodbye to all of you and have good luck and fun. Bye-bye. See you, hopefully, later, sometimes. Bye-bye. Well, in the beginning of our lectures, we asked ourselves, what is architecture? And I think this is one of the important questions we're following through these 6 lectures. We heard about form and space, but it's also a very important question to all of your studies. Either you're studying architecture, city planning, or geodesy, and I think we got a little bit more closer to the to the answers. But let me first repeat the detailed questions which are behind this question of what is architecture. So first we have to ask what is a building? Then we can ask what is architecture? And also what are the challenges of forces or construction? What is the best way to face these challenges, and what is good? What is a good use of space? Or the other way around, what kind of space is the best for the demands of using, and what kind of construction is needed? So, what are the challenges of climate, environment, or the ground the building will be placed on, and last but not least, how much money do I have for a building, or how much efforts can I spend on a building, and at least then what is architecture? Yes, I would like to give you a very current example of to answer the question, perhaps, what is architecture? A few months ago, or let's say a year ago, Lürssen Shipyards or Blohm and Voss presented a new architectural project or a new building project. They wanted to build a new roof, a new house on the swimming dock number 10. They wanted to achieve better conditions for their workers, a better efficiency in terms of energy, in terms of work quality, etc. And this image shows the first idea of a first solution, a very simple standard design. To be honest, it's very difficult to say that this is architecture. It fulfills the very basic elements, the very basic conditions of what they demand, but what is definitely missing are the qualities of the urban space. You can say that the harbor is not an urban space, but when you go along the promenade, then this building is very present. You can see it on several postcards or several images in the internet showing these docks. It is something like what some people identify Hamburg with. For example, if you lay in a park, you have a look at it, which you can see on the picture on the right. And even the Chief Urban Planning Director of Hamburg, Mr. Franz Josef Höng, was not very satisfied with the idea to have a huge, very huge box and a closed box on one of the docks on the other side of this promenade. And he asked the Lewisham Shipyard to organize a competition, an architectural and engineer competition, and they agreed with it. And the results of it is where this design made by Werner Sobeck, a very well-known architect and engineer. Architecture and a simple building. And so this is Werner Sobeck's proposal. The north facade is built with an 0.8 millimeter film membrane, transparent and partly translucent. The south and the side facades are built out of slim metal sandwich panels with 6 centimeter thickness. They have a variable roof, so if there are bigger vessels, you can work on the vessels as well. They have integrated traveling bridge, and altogether for almost the same price as the first solution, with an efficient structure of folded facade. He found a solution which is good to use, which is well and efficient constructed, and what is beautiful. It fits into the panorama of the harbor front of the harbor of Hamburg. And to summarize, brought engineering and architecture together. Now this building is under construction, and you can see the dimension of it. If you pass the harbor, if you pass the old Elbe tunnel under the Elbe, under the river Elbe, or if you go to the fish market, then you see how dominant this building is and what it means to have a closed wall and you can't see what is inside. Now they have a very huge transparent display, and if the owner of the ship agrees, then you can follow the works on big vessels, big cruising vessels, or other big ships in this dock. And I think you see the difference between the first idea, the basic idea, and now the idea of Werner Sobeck, the architect and engineer. And that's what I like to underline. This is something different, and it's more culture to face the task and to see that there is another context in which this building is in between, that it is dominating and in a way very significant for this public space and for the people passing it. So perhaps you see the difference, and you see what I mean when I ask what is architecture and what is the difference between a simple building and architecture. Well, today I'd like to summarize the last 5 lectures we had and give you some examples of biographies of some people, some architects, some engineers, some artists that you already know, but perhaps there's the one or two details of the personality of these people what you don't know so far. And just to tell you something about what is behind the idea to combine form and space and to create space. The first example is Marcus Vitruvius Pollio, Vitruve, who wrote this most important book, the 10 books of architecture, after he has been retired. But his living dates are not really clear, but he was born between the years 80 and 70 before Christ and died in 15 before Christ, and he worked for Caesar and also for the Emperor Augusto. And as I said, after he was retired, he wrote his 10 books on architecture and came to the conclusion of 3 qualities of architecture: firmitas, venustas, and utilitas, stability, beauty, and utility. And all these 3 qualities have to work together. So this is not a single question of single qualities, but also these 3 qualities are working together. And if you thinking of the example I gave of Werner Sobeck's solution for the Blohm + Voss shipyard, you perhaps see what I meant when I said this is architecture and it makes a difference between a simple building and this kind of building which appeals a little bit or addresses our senses. So the 3 qualities Vitruve defined are still valuable today. Also, this image I think you know quite well. It is made by Leonardo da Vinci during the Renaissance times in the 15th or 16th century. But it goes back to the studies of a human body after Vitruve, and now you can find this image on every €1 coin in Italy. So it is still present, and it was meant by Vitruve and Leonardo to bring mankind, or the scale of mankind, into the center of the world, into the center of architecture. So the human scale, so to speak, is since then in the center of the demands of good architecture and the demands of a good quality of building. So when we ask what is good architecture, there are rising much more questions. So what kind of space is the best for the demands of using, and what is the best space for human well-being? What kind of construction is needed, and what are the challenges of climate, environment, and all the ground the building will be placed on, and how much efforts can I spend on a building, or how much money can I spend on the building? I think these questions will stay, and they will follow us all through the studies and through our profession if we are working on the planning, the design, or the construction of buildings. All this finds a good summary or a good conclusion in the 3 demands of quality Vitruve demanded about 2,000 years ago. I won't repeat it again, but you can see on the slide what I mean. Well, there was another guy mentioned in this lecture and in the lectures before, Leonardo da Vinci, who lived between 1452 and 1519. And as you can see on the slide, he was a guy who had, let's say, more than 3 or 4 professions. He was a painter, and he was an engineer, he was an architect, and he was a technician. So he found, for example, designs for airplanes or for tanks, which you can see on the slide, left side in the middle. And he designed, for example, had an idea for a bridge over the Golden Horn in Istanbul, what you can see on the right-hand side up. And he was a very famous painter. He made a lot of very interesting portraits, and the most famous portrait is on the right, the Mona Lisa. So you can say he was multi-talented, and which is, well, you don't have to be multi-talented. I think you have enough if you have one study, but it's deeply recommended to look at other disciplines, or even the neighbor disciplines. So if you're working as a civil engineer, I think it's worth to be interested in what architects do, or what people do planning towns, or making geodesies, or even to be interested in art, other things. So it's very important to have a general overview for that what you are working with, to see the context you're working in. Another example of a person who is multi-talented is Antonio Pietro Avellino, called Filaret, what means friend of goodness. He was an architect and engineer. He was an architectural theorist, of course. He was a sculptor and a millier, a producer of medals. He also was a man of Renaissance, the rebirth of ancient time, especially the times of Greek and Roman architecture. And he wrote his tractate about architecture and about the ideal of a perfect city. So he is also someone who looks around and is not very much specialized on one thing or focused on one thing. Another man of the rebirth was Michelangelo Buonarroti. Well, excuse me, but it's they are all men's but in history there are no women known. That perhaps there are, following some researches, and some women are discovered which were active at that time. But in the moment we just know that we have man in these positions. Michelangelo was the constructor of the dome on top of the Cathedral of St. Peter in Rome. But he was also a sculptor and a painter, and his most famous work, for example, was the ceiling of the 16th chapel in the Vatican. You see it on the right, on the picture on top, and in the image after that we have the scene where God was contacting Adam, and below there is a sculpture of the Pietà and the big David statue, what was also designed by Michelangelo. By the way, there was another guy during the times of Renaissance in terms of architectural theories. He was important, Leon Battista Alberti. He was living almost at the same time than Filaret, and he also wrote a book about architecture, De Rea Edificatoria, between 1443 and 1452. And he, as well as Filaret, he likes to give the architect another role, and he says he is not anymore a craftsman. It depends on the will of his client, and he described the architect as an individual responsible for himself. And further on, the role of architects, and including engineers, changed into a role where both were responsible, exactly responsible for that, what they are doing, according to the ideals of the Renaissance, to support the individual, to individuum, and to make a change to the Middle Ages, where the team of architects were more important. So the individual architect or engineer became more and more responsible of what he's doing in terms of art, in terms of expression, but also in terms of the doings, in terms of architecture itself. According to this definition of the architect as an individual, the Ottoman architect Mimar Sinan became very famous, and he is still very famous. He lived almost at the same time, a little bit later than Michelangelo, Filaret and Alberti. He was not only responsible for designing mosques, he was also, in the best meaning, a civil engineer who was designing bridges or water supply and doing some normal things for the Sultan and for the empire, and he was a constructor, an artist, and an architect in one person. And if you like to know something more about him, then it's recommended to read the book of Elif Shafak, who wrote a novel on Mimar Sinan and the time he lived in. If you switch to the 18th century, then you find people who were not really architects, but they felt responsible of the quality of architecture or the well-being of mankind. For example, Marc-Antoine Leger, he is a Jesuit priest, and he felt responsible of the well-being of human mankind when he wrote his essays sur l'architecture. When you take a look at Gottfried Semper in the 19th century, you may say, okay, this is a prototype of a nerd architect or a nerd engineer. But when he was disabled to work as an architect, when he had to flee from the Section Kingdom because he was member of the revolution in 1848, and he was in London, where he just had a small job. So he started to reflect on building, on architecture, and wrote theories about it. Nevertheless, he left a very significant work. Even the Semper Opera in Dresden, or the synagogue in Dresden, which was destroyed in the 20th century during the Nazi time, but nevertheless it is a very important building he left. Or the building of the Polytechnical University in Zurich, which is a very important building by Gottfried Semper. Unfortunately, there is no building left. He built in Hamburg and Altona. I listed some pictures. On the left-hand side, you see a small exhibition building, which he built in the Donnerspark, which is very close to the Old Martian, and Altona Park or the pharmacy he designed for his brother in Hamburg, or in the center, on the top, a building he designed for his mother in Altona. None of these buildings are still left, so we have no traces of this very famous architect, which is originally a son of the city of Altona, born in Hamburg, but he raised in Altona, and and left more traces in the world than in his hometown. Sometimes you can think that if you don't focus on your profession too much, then you have the best ideas and you can find the best solutions. For example, Joseph Paxton, he was not an architect or a constructor or an engineer, he was a gardener, and but he developed this very breaking through building, revolutionary building of the Crystal Palace, which was where the exhibition, the World Exhibition, took place, where Gottfried Semper took a lot of inspirations from. So he developed, so to speak, by the way, a new kind of architecture, and related to Gottfried Semper, he was not very satisfied with it, because he says the glass wall is not a real limitation of space, is not a real limit, so between the inside and the outside, and the difference between inside and outside is one of the most important thing in architecture. So when we take a look at the 20th century and we see the chain model used by Antonio Gaudi and others to find a combination of steel and concrete, and to design, for example, a cathedral which was built over decades and still is not finished, the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, and he started it in the year 1882, and it's still under construction. And Antonio Gaudi used this kind of construction also for other buildings, for his housings, for example, for the Casa Mila, which you see here on this slide. And so this kind of construction became a basic DNA for his kind of spaces he was designing. So it is a kind of DNA of his own kind of world he was looking for to offer the people to use. So we also got to know the photographs of Konrad Wachsmann, which he published in his book Aspects, and so he's photographing antique architecture from ancient times to show the construction line or to show the structure in it. But he also took a picture of this fisher net to, so to speak, as to set a symbol of tensile forces. And so he is also someone who is looking into the nature to get inspirations on his work as a constructor or as an architect. So we know Konrad Wachsmann as a specialist for networks and developing knots in steel or in wooden constructions. So these are early examples of his work. A wooden house for Albert Einstein in Kaput, which is a small village or a small town close to Potsdam, or to Dr. Estrich, which is in Güterbro, also very close to Berlin, a single home. So Konrad Wachsmann was also a normal architect, designing with stones and bricks, with wood, but he was also working for a company which is producing prefabricated wooden houses. So I think this was the basic for his systematic thinking and innovating a system of architecture, first in wood, then also in steel or in steel concrete. So he took a lot of different aspects and brought this together, thinking about architecture, thinking about construction, and thinking about buildings. Yes, but let me come back to 2 or 3 engineers, Franz Dischinger and Ulrich Finsterwalder. They developed together with Walter Bauersfeld, with the Zeiss company, this planetarium, because they looked for a projection space to project an artificial dome to project the stars with this planetarium projector. And they found out that you can have a very slim concrete shell, or a concrete dome in this particular case. And together with Zeiss and Duvidac, the Dyckerhoff and Wittmann AG, short Duvidac, they developed a special technique to achieve very slim shells or very slim elements to construct, for example, factory halls, and to transport it or to produce these kind of shells on the construction site. So these shells can be prefabricated elements to realize factories. And in the 1930s, Adolf Hitler rose a very intensive economic plan to prepare the Second World War, and these kind of elements were good to use to construct very quickly and very much elements of these factory halls. Together with architects, for example, in this particular case, Gottberg Nissen, a very important architect to rebuild Hamburg in the years after the Second World War. But first, he had an architectural firm that was responsible for factory halls, for example, for airplane engineers very close to Prague, or in Arnimswalde, which is a former German place, is now in Poland. And he worked together with the later architect of the GDR, Hermann Henselmann. Both architects used this development of Zeiss Duvidac and Finsterwalder and Dischinger to create these factory halls. And there were many of these kind of factories all around the place to prepare factories in the Second World War. Dischinger and Finsterwalder used this technique starting in the 1920s. Here another example on the top, the wholesale market hall in Frankfurt am Main. Architect Martin Elsässer, I showed you that before in another lecture. Or a specialty, they developed boats out of concrete, so concrete is able to swim. So the technical development was very strong, and at least they achieved these very slim roof shades and in prefabricated elements, the so-called Zeiss Duvidac shells. Another architect who was very much involved in these factory buildings in the 1930s and 1940s was Bernhard Hermkes. And after the Second World War, he worked in some projects. He worked together with Ulrich Finsterwalder, and they, for example, created these palace or this cathedral of market halls, the great wholesale market in Hamburg, Hammerbrook, and they achieved this very beautiful and this very interesting building. And you can see in the archives, or if you study the designs of Bernhard Hermkes, how intense the co-working was between civil engineering and architecture to create this very slim roof and this the light folding in. Hermkes used a lot of models to create this space, to find out where the most intensive light was given, and for example to give this hall this very unique form. And Bernhard Hermkes was also a specialist in constructing with good engineers, so he was going also on this borderline of engineering and architecture. Another very impressive building is the Auditorium Maximum at the university in Hamburg. Another example are the greenhouses very close to the fair, the Hamburg Fair, and in the garden of Planten und Blumen. I mean the building in the pre-ground, not the high-rise back, which is the Plaza Hotel, which is built in the 1970s, so later as the greenhouses. 1960s scientific research, architecture, design, and constructioning was very close together, and one of the light star figures in this time was Richard Buckminster Fuller, called Buckminster Fuller, who made a lot of researches on very different fields. For example, for geodesy, he developed a known system to measure the world, and this system, it was a very small step to his construction of domes on the basis of triangle grids. Perhaps he knew something about Walter Bauersfeld, we don't know, so it's a parallel development. But he was also very ambitious on the field of design, so he designed the Damaxian car, a three-wheeled car in the 1930s. He was on very, very different fields. He was very active, and so this is a phenomenon in this time. I showed you also his huge domes he developed to cover Manhattan, to create, so to speak, something like a private sky. Action car, by the way, was very much constructed with the airstream, as you can imagine, and it can turn on its place. So with this third wheel, it was very, very good to drive. And as it is in the backside, you have no problems with the stability of the car. Unfortunately, they had some accidents with these cars, so Chrysler, the automobile company, lost the interest to develop more of these cars, and the project was stopped. So this generation was very optimistic. They found technical solution, they found ways to build, to create, to change the world, and they were very optimistic that the new is better than the old, and find new ways of construction, new ways of designing and building new spaces. The idea of a new generation, new dimension, a new task, a new challenge of designing the world, so to speak, was also the engineer Felix Candela. And I showed you his very extraordinary construction and his experiments on the field of construction in South America. But there were also the same kind of engineers and architects, or engineer-architect, even in the former GDR, for example, Ulrich Müther. He was a master in building high-tech constructions with very complicated calculations, but he knew that he can't always have these high-tech in the production, so he was capable to combine his high-tech construction with very, very simple ways of building and constructing. Even these escape towers, for example, they produced in the sand of the beach, digging a hole and filling it up with concrete and steel and finding the form. So he was able to help the people if they have not enough material, or if they don't have the right material, to create a special construction or to create a special form. In the GDR he was responsible for the special forms, for the aesthetic forms, the special aesthetic forms. Not to have the regular one, but to have the exception of building. And I know it made very much fun to him to find a better, to optimize the construction and the production, to find a special form for the restaurant, for example, the restaurant Seerose in a residential area in Potsdam, or the music pavilion in Sassnitz, a town in Rügen on the Baltic Sea. We have beyond this pavilion you have a very nice view over the sea. So this area is something like a holiday hotspot, and it makes a significant building for this particular and very special place. So let me show you at the end of the lectures two other guys, two other contemporary architects. First, Rem Koolhaas, and as we have a summary of the lectures before, you find him again here, and in person, in his biography, he is a very interesting guy, because he started his career not as an architect. He was a journalist, and then he came back to, or he came to the architecture, I suppose because he found very responsible for the designing, and now he is working not only as an architect, he's working as a researcher, making researches of developments, for example, city developments in Africa or in other countries. He founded not only the Office of Metropolitan Architecture, but also an institute of making researches all around the world. And he is, as an architect, he is responsible in very complicated and different buildings, but he can also offer small things like the front pack, as I told you, not the backpack, but the front pack, because he has the idea if you have the front pack, then you can have all things available you need very, very directly. So he designed this in the feeling to get something new. He designed it with Prada. Well, of course, he's a famous architect, so he can work with such kind of companies. And as a curator of the Architectural Biennale in Venice some years ago, he made clear that some of the elements of architecture, what the elements of architecture are. So he became also a theorist in architecture. He published a very well-known and frequented book called SMLXL, which means the sizes of architecture. He became very famous with a novel, or a kind of novel of architecture, Delirious New York, in the 1980s. So he is both a writer, theorist, or more, a writer, theorist, a designer, someone who is reflecting architecture, making researches, and he sees architecture as a science. Well, the last example of a multi-talented architect, engineer, and designer is Norman Foster. We saw his covering court of the courts of the British Museum in London. I showed you the chapel he designed for the Vatican, for the Architectural Biennale in Venice 2018. But he became very famous, like Richard Rogers or Enzo Piano. All three were very technical-oriented architects and designers. And he became very famous in the 1970s and in the 1980s. We all know his work for the Bundestag, for the Reichstag, with the dome on top of the Reichstag, which was created together with the new design of this German parliament. And he also designed bridges or tables. This table you see down on the left is a design which was sold very often, and very much so he also became very famous in that. And in his private life, he's also a pilot. So, and as he is working all around the world in different construction places, he always takes his own plane to fly over the world. So it's also something special kind of living. His carbon footprint will be very high, but on the other side, he was one of the first who designed a high-rise for the Commerzbank in Frankfurt am Main, the first building which has no air condition inside, which, so to speak, is the first green or ecological high-rise which was developed. Of course, this is also history in the moment. Now we are definitely at the end of the last lecture of history of architecture and structural design, and my part of form and space. At least we saw some biographies of engineers and architects who combine all these things together to find a general view, on the world and on the kind of living. Yes, I hope you learned something during these lectures I gave you, and I hope you will write a good examiner after that, and you're successful in all your studies you are going to follow, either in architecture, in town planning, or in geodesy. Yes, in German we say Auf Wiedersehen. Sometimes it's something special. If you coming again, then you probably had the problem not to pass through the examiner. But so I hope to see you. But I hope in the same time I hope you are successful in the examiner. We're gonna have another Q&A. You find the date on the schedule. But I can say here goodbye to you and wish you luck and success in all what you're doing next. It was nice to talk to you. It was very interesting to find a new form for me of this kind of lecture, and I hope you enjoyed it. So, see you. Bye bye. Have a good time.